Have you noticed that everyone is freaking the fuck out about screen time lately?
So your latest book is called The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness.
The Surgeon General is making a bold statement. In an op-ed in the New York Times, Dr. Vivek Murthy writes in part, "It is time to require a Surgeon General's warning label on social media platforms."
They are being held captive to powerful forces outside their own control, algorithms that are intentionally addictive, intended to pull them in and keep their attention.
They're just numbing themselves. They're just checking out of society. They're just can't get rid of it, can't put it away.
He likens the phone addiction to that of drugs.
Shows like Cocomelon are like crack to a baby, the worst show on earth that you could let them watch because of what it does to their brain.
Children have met drug dealers and sex predators and have really experienced mental health disorders.
All the video game addictions for kids is a disaster for them. Their thumb representation in their brain is expanding. And you know what other animal have large thumb representations? Monkeys.
Okay. If everybody gets more and more addicted and people now in their 20s and 30s are in charge, and they've lost creativity, they've lost their spark, they've lost their ability to interface with other human beings. Where does that put America?
This tech panic spans the political spectrum, of course, but one, I have a working theory that conservatives are finding this particular anxiety to be a very useful Trojan horse for their more unsavory ideas. And two, I think blaming technology for all of our ills very much misses the point. I found an interesting case study for all of this in a recent book called Digital Madness: How Social Media is Driving Our Mental Health Crisis and How to Restore Our Sanity. I'm not recommending this book. I actually hate it, but I think sometimes hate reading can be an educational experience. The author is a psychologist and addiction pundit named Nicholas Kardaras, who went viral in 2016 for this sensational article in the New York Post.
It's a petrifying digital warning that every parent needs to hear. If you think your kids are addicted to their screens, you might be right. New research suggests now that technology is like digital heroin.
His claims about screens are mostly based on clinical observations. The Verge noted shortly after this that Kardaras had never published any of his claims in a peer-reviewed paper for other scientists to assess. And clinical observations are not nothing, but they're also not proof of a population-wide trend. Kardaras owns rehab centers where he treats digital addictions, so of course he's going to see the worst cases. And I'm scare quoting that not because I don't believe that technology can be bad for you. I think it's possible to develop a self-destructive relationship with just about anything. I have written about my own problems with internet use. See here. Sometimes I also pine for the Motorola Razr.
Cunty, cunty, cunty.
But addiction is a sort of squishy concept that means something different depending on who you're talking to. Quote, addiction is conceptually seductive. It is tempting to say that we are addicted to addiction. We seem to use it and need it more and more, and it takes the place of other ideas. At the very least, addiction has become an all-purpose metaphor for the often troubling relationships we have with what we love, enjoy, desire, or require, and thus find hard to control. I'm critical of the idea that addiction is just a brain disease because I think it tends to overlook the social and political aspects of this experience, but phone addiction is currently not a medical term. Most psychologists use words like compulsive behavior or problematic use instead. You wouldn't know this reading Digital Madness though, because Kardaras is a technological determinist, meaning he believes technology is the primary cause of big changes to society. History is complicated, but techno-determinism tries to make it simple. It also tends to deny that humans have agency here, that we shape technology as much as it shapes us. Reading this book, I got the sense that Dr. Nicholas hates me. Quote, we've been coddled and enabled by our tech into becoming ignorant, reactive, shallow thinking, lazy, amorphous, entertainment seeking, underinformed consumer blobs seeking sensation. I don't really think this is a fair characterization of internet users. We are aware of the internet's problems. It's the most terminally online who are also talking about how harmful social media is. And apparently the Mr. Beast era of retention editing editing is out. You would think that if we were drones driven by only stimuli, editing would just be getting more intense. But now people want to watch quiet 3-hour deep dives about Twilight or like this guy eating cereal and going to the gym. I'm not convinced that Kardaras actually understands internet culture at all. At one point, after ranting about talent challenged influencers for like 8 pages, he brings up the Instagram egg just to really drive home how vapid he thinks we all are. And if you don't know what that is, in 2019, a marketing guy posted this picture of an egg on Instagram with the caption, "Let's set a world record together and get the most liked post on Instagram," beating the current world record held by Kylie Jenner, 18 million. We got this. The egg broke the record and became the most liked post on Instagram for a while. And okay, this is not very deep, but it's clear to me why this framing worked. The absurdity of an egg getting more likes than Kylie Jenner taps into a collective irritation that we have with influencers. It's a satire of internet celebrity, which means the Instagram egg and Kardaras are kind of saying the same thing, but for someone who doesn't understand memes as a visual language, this just looks like habit-forming and inane content. The central thesis of digital madness is that our species is getting weaker and sicker because we all still have hunter-gatherer DNA that is out of place in high-tech modernity. He writes, "Our DNA and our psychological, social, and emotional needs are still genetically paleo. The problem with this is that we are still evolving." The evolutionary biologist Marlene Zuck calls this idea a paleo fantasy. Quote, "To think of ourselves as misfits in our own time and of our own making flatly contradicts what we now understand about the way evolution works, namely that rate matters, that evolution can be fast, slow, or in between." Kardaras thinks more young people are struggling with addiction and mental illness now because he imagines we're falling short of some ideal pre-technology human that never existed. And the solutions he proposes include going into nature and strengthening our psychological immune system by reading Plato so we can learn reason and honor. Quote, "The brakes to the gas pedal of our appetites." Unfortunately, we don't hear a lot about honor in the mental health field these days. We're too busy being lectured about shame and trauma. The kids have it too easy now, I guess. And what they really need, according to Kardaras, is to learn resilience through some good old-fashioned adversity. Quote, "The problem with many today isn't that they feel too much shame, they don't feel enough shame."
Oh, straight people. There's just a problem there.
As a fragile, brain-dulled, weeble-like, poorly postured, no eye contact couch potato myself, this book was clearly not written for me. I imagine the ideal reader would be someone who feels a deep yearning for a lost golden age where life was supposedly better. As Kardaras says,
"The antidote to the modern is the ancient."
If you speak meme, I'm sure you recognize these trad politics, which we will get into, but I just want to point out that the main rhetorical strategy in this book is appealing to reason. It's right there in the title, and what I find really funny about Reason Bros is that they're still making an emotional argument. You can't really separate emotion from reason. So when you make an appeal to reason, you're also tapping into the stigma that our culture has attached to madness. I'm a bit of a sucker, you know. I want to believe people are good in their hearts. So I used to take these appeals to reason very seriously, gather up my charts and facts to try to reasonably debate stuff like this. But I've realized that Reason Bros aren't actually interested in my rational arguments.
As the adults in the room, you would think the rational, reasonable people would say,
this is a PR strategy that people use to sell ideas. If you can make yourself look like the most reasonable person in the room, a lot of people will side with you based on those vibes alone. One of the core ideas of the Enlightenment was that reason is what separates humans from animals. Madness, insanity, irrationality, these have all been used historically to dehumanize, casting certain groups in society as dangerous, incompetent, and threatening to all that is white, male, and holy. And while I admit that the debunk is an unmatched intellectual high, I want to resist taking this bait of rationality and reaching for stats and figures. Instead, I want to see what we can learn from this book's feelings. Because honestly, feelings don't care about your facts. Nostalgia. Adversity rather than Alexa, and earning rewards rather than push-button instant gratification helps to build these necessary skills. These are issues that our parents and grandparents didn't have to deal with. I'm not saying that their lives were better. Their lives were more difficult for the most part. And in that difficulty, There was the wellspring of resilience, character, perseverance, and grit. There's no need for me to compare storming the beaches at Normandy versus crafting a snarky tweet as a lifestyle contrast. Ah yes, war. What a great character building exercise. Nostalgia is a powerful, rose-colored affect. It's a kind of yearning that comforts you, but sort of in a painful way. You long for a time and place that maybe didn't ever exist, because did you know that every time you have a memory, your brain reconstructs it? So you're basically always reinventing your own memories. Anyway, Cardaris does at least own this, which I appreciate. Quote, I can hear the cries of, he's falling into that old trap of glorifying and romanticizing the past. Yes. I am. In fact, that's one of the major points of this book. The digital age has stripped away certain critical and sanity-sustaining dynamics that once were prevalent and now no longer exist. Except madness has always been with us. Historian Andrew Scull writes that it's, quote, a phenomenon to be found in all known societies and part of civilization not located outside of it. Even Cardaris' favorite guy, Plato, wasn't totally reason-pilled. He thought that divine madness could also be a path to transcendent truths. Nostalgia is usually associated with conservatives because they love tradition and they tend to be suspicious of progress. But there's nostalgia on the left too, just for different things. It's not always nefarious, but in our current political climate, nostalgia is big with right-wing populists. Cardaris is convinced that the elites are trying to trap us in the metaverse, and he's very disturbed by this image of a cow in a VR headset.
You may not have been to the metaverse yet, but these cows are already working there.
The Matrix illusion needs to be maintained, or else rebellion may break out. Again, if he ever went online, he would know the VR cow was a giant joke and everybody hated it. The metaverse is extremely unpopular, but Cardaris paints the public as sheeple at the mercy of tech billionaires who are motivated not by mere greed, but by their transhumanist desire to invent the singularity and live forever. Quote, the singularity will also require the continued enslavement, exploitation, and subjugation of society's worker bees, us. We need to continue to be digitally distracted and in our virtual dream state for the select few to achieve their desired goal. Populism, like nostalgia, also spans the political spectrum.
I'm oftentimes embraced by both the left and the right and reviled by both the left and the right for different reasons.
It's a rhetorical strategy that can appear in combination with all kinds of political ideas, but it always casts politics as a war between the people who are pure and the elites who are corrupt. These elites have stolen something from us, tricked us. We need to wake up and fight back.
And when I say we're living inside the Matrix, I'm not stating that with irony or as a joke. We are genuinely actually living inside of the Matrix.
Class distinctions tend to fall apart here, which is how you get people like Cardaris, an Ivy League educated CEO, lumping himself in with the worker bees. But again, populist narratives have some emotional truths to them. They especially spread in times when people are really suffering. Populism, quote, asks the right questions, but provides the wrong answers. And because it's built on the ideal of majority rule, it can end up being pretty shit for minorities.
A lot of people are afraid that their livelihood is no longer secured. Most young people I know don't believe their livelihood is secured. Neoliberalism has devastated so many people's ways of living and ways of working, forced them from their homes and their jobs, or made life increasingly precarious. So people are made nervous. They're made nervous by climate change, by war, escalating as we speak. As a right-wing political operator, if you reach into that fear and say, guess what? The reason you're so afraid, the reason you're so anxious, the reason that the future is unclear is gender or race or migration. You're able to reorganize and stoke those fears and anxieties in a direction that moves against those minorities or against those populations in favor of a really strong state that promises you a reactionary and impossible dream of return.
This is where another feeling comes into play. Disgust. The clinical fallout from this social media contagion that breeds self-centeredness and polarized binary thinking is spreading. Indeed, we're seeing that society at large and the body politic are getting sick and corrupted by this invasive digital virus that's sickened the entire host body. And as we know, sick societies breed sick people. Oh my God, just use a fucking thesaurus. That's what it's for. A large chunk of this book is spent trying to convince the reader that the internet has made us all disgusting. He does this by falling back on tropes that have come to symbolize failure in the American imagination. Fat, disability, mental illness. These are facts of life. They are part of having a human body, but they've been stigmatized because they fall outside the norm of the rational citizen, the self-sufficient, self-controlling hard worker, like Dr. Nicholas, who climbed the ladder from middle-class kid in Queens to successful nightclub owner in Manhattan. My version of the American dream, he says, until drug addiction brought him to the brink of death. Quote, when addiction kicked me in the ass and I lost everything, my business, my identity, my physical health, and certainly my mental health, I felt as empty as the hole in a donut. I was just nothing. This was the 90s, so it had basically nothing to do with the internet, and he concludes that it was his lack of purpose and meaning in life that led him into addiction. Again, not totally wrong, but Kardaras now thinks it's the internet depriving us of meaning, and he frames it as a vector spreading psychological contagion. Contagion is the realm of disgust. It's a biological reaction that protects us from disease, but it's also something we learn socially. It's based on cultural norms. The philosopher Martin Nussbaum defines disgust as a reaction to anything that reminds us we are animals that will one day rot. Quote, human beings are deeply troubled about being human, about being highly intelligent and resourceful on the one hand, but weak and vulnerable, helpless against death on the other. We are ashamed of this awkward condition, and in manifold ways, we try to hide from it. In the process, we develop and teach both shame at human frailty and disgust at the signs of our animality and mortality. Nussbaum argues that people tend to project this disgust at their own bodies onto vulnerable outgroups. Quote, it is especially important that a pluralistic, democratic society protect itself from such projection reactions, which have been at the root of gross evils throughout history. This is why I find these social contagion narratives about the internet pretty disturbing, especially when they're couched in nice-sounding liberalisms, which Kardaras does try to do in the book. He is much more explicit about his true feelings in interviews, though.
I'm seeing that a lot of these kids are just sort of consciously or unconsciously mimicking these behaviors or these disorders because they're now aspirational.
Right.
It's cool to be trans now. And it's so euphemistically called gender affirmative healthcare. I can't stand when, you don't call something what it is, but this gender affirmative healthcare. So then the narrative becomes, how can you deny healthcare to children? God forbid we're even allowed to say boys and girls anymore. That's the whole other confusion, by the way, that's confusing so many young people, is the whole pronoun thing. But that aside, the reality is that we're going to be a society gone mad. Look at the Navy promotional video where you have a drag queen. That's
right.
That's the upside down part of the society. I never thought that we'd be at a place where up would be down. There would be no such thing as a woman. If the other side keeps this trajectory going, we're going to sort of implode as a society. This is sort of the end times of Rome.
You didn't think we were going to get out of this section without talking about the transgendered, did you? In the book, Kardaras splits the trans community into true trans and pseudo-trans, the latter of which he thinks are just being confused by trans influencers. Where have I heard that before? I regret to inform you, Dr. Nicholas, but teenagers on Tumblr beat you to this shitty argument by about 10 years. As rational, reasonable evidence, he cites one study by Lisa Littman on rapid onset gender dysphoria, which has been debunked to death and officially denounced, but we're not doing stats and figures today, okay? Go read Julia Serano for that. She calls transgender social contagion a zombie narrative that just will not die, despite all the evidence against it. And I think this is because disgust is such a powerful feeling. You can trace this particular strain back to the 1920s when Radcliffe Hall published The Well of Loneliness, a lesbian novel that dared not to be tragic, but to blame society for mistreating the gays, which really triggered this guy, James Douglas, who wrote A Book That Must Be Suppressed. Quote, I have seen the plague stalking shamelessly through great assemblies. I have heard it whispered about by young men and young women who do not and cannot grasp its unutterable putrefaction. Both aspects of it are thrust upon healthy and innocent minds. The contagion cannot be escaped. It pervades our social life. Sounds like a J.K. Rowling tweet. And that's because social conservatives are still using the main points of this article to affect policy today. One of which was homosexuals feel no shame. The problem with many today isn't that they feel too much shame, they don't feel enough shame. In the middle of the book, Kardaras includes an interview with another psychologist who specializes in BPD, which he also thinks is spreading via the internet. And she says this, I think that as technology advances, we will continue to see the most disordered individuals producing more content and encouraging others to behave as they do. If you would like content from a disordered individual delivered directly to your email, sign up at sluggish.xyz. There are free posts sometimes and paid posts almost every week for $6 a month. Please help me purchase my brain medicine. The problem for Kardaras is not that trans people or the mentally ill exist, it's that some of them are flaunting it on the internet and corrupting the normal children. And listen, I don't claim to know this guy's personal politics, I'm just analyzing this text he put into the world, but I'm especially critical of doctors who put their professional opinions behind this kind of stuff, because it does have real effects. Kardaras has been invited to testify in the Florida House about the dangers of smartphones, which the Republicans keep calling digital fentanyl. Here he is on his website with Florida Speaker of the House, Chris Sprowls, and State Senator Danny Burgess, who both voted for the Don't Say Gay bill. Oh, and look, here's right-wing populist Ron DeSantis signing a bill that bans kids under 14 from social media. And what are these conservatives so scared that kids are going to find online?
What do you think is the top issue that they should be watching and the top issue that conservatives should be taking action on right now?
Well, there are a couple of things. Of course, protecting minor children from the transgender and this culture and that influence.
Dislocation. I felt as empty as the hole in a donut. I was just nothing. In a paper that frames addiction from a cultural perspective, the sociologist Robin Room explains that Americans in particular are especially afraid of losing control because our culture was built on the notion of personal responsibility. In storytelling, addiction becomes an extremely serviceable plot motivator that provides an explanation for this loss of control. Quote, there has been a strong tendency for stories about alcoholism and addiction to present the eventual victory as a triumph of willpower, achieved by a hero acting alone. This is not even subtle in Digital Madness. It is Kardaras' cure. He writes, my work with addiction over the past 20 years has largely consisted of helping struggling addicts to reframe their challenges as the obstacle-laden course of the hero archetype in the hero's journey, and to then find a passion or goal that, in its pursuit and its attainment, can be life-altering and transformative. And I don't disagree that meaning and purpose help us get out of addiction, but I think Kardaras misses the free market forest for the technological trees here. While setting up his argument that technology denies us purpose and meaning, Kardaras references Karl Marx's famous line about religion, calling digital addiction the opiate of the masses. And I'm sorry, but we need to go on a little tangent here because this is one of the most misquoted lines that Marx ever wrote. I didn't even fully understand it until I read this paper. Here's the full Marx quote. Religious suffering is at the same time an expression of real suffering and a protest against real suffering. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the spirit of a spiritless situation. It is the opium of the people. Sociologist Andrew McKinnon explains that people tend to look at this quote through a present-day understanding of opium as a dangerous, prohibited drug. But when Marx was writing this in 1843, opium had completely different meanings. The concept of addiction that we know today did not exist yet. That developed toward the end of the 19th century, and Marx actually used opium himself. It was a common medicine. Everybody had opium in their house, and it was also an important commodity at the time that the British were fighting wars over in China. McKinnon argues that Marx was using opium as a symbol of both expression and protest in the working class, because poor working conditions made them sicker, which meant they took more opium, a commodity that helped them work more, which made them sicker. Quote, opium thus expressed in an indirect way the ravages of capitalism on the health and well-being of the population, but most particularly the workers. This is exactly what Kardaras misses, and also distinguishes right-wing populist rhetoric about the elites from a socialist analysis. Like, they're not wrong about the billionaires, but the narrative that the digital overlords are conspiring to trap us all in the metaverse focuses too much on CEOs as individuals instead of seeing them as an inevitable result of how our economic system works. If it wasn't these billionaires, it would just be some other billionaires. Capitalism will always produce a few people on the top who have a lot more wealth than everyone else. Kardaras is like so close, but then he misses the point again when he brings up Rat Park. This was a pretty famous study in the 1970s by the addiction researcher Bruce Alexander, who found that the mice he studied only got addicted to free drug water when they were isolated in cages, which shows how important the environment is in contributing to addictions. Kardaras interprets this to mean that people get addicted when they feel psychologically caged, and they use drugs as a means to escape. But I think he's doing Bruce Alexander a little bit dirty here, because these are not the conclusions Alexander drew from his own work. The cage, for Alexander, is not psychological. It is, ironically, the free market. To create free markets, you have to cut people's social and cultural ties so they can become individual economic actors. This leads to widespread fragmentation of cultures, traditions, and communities, which creates a painful existential state called dislocation, which Alexander defines as the absence of belonging, identity, meaning, and purpose. Again, Kardaras is asking the right questions, but he's speaking about meaning and purpose in an individual sense, and Alexander is talking about a structural problem. He views addiction as an adaptation to the deep existential pain that is dislocation. And he argues that in free market societies, dislocation is universal because a free market, quote, systematically curtails psychosocial integration in all its members. It fucks us all up. Poor people get it worse, but the rich are not immune. They also experience this dislocation, which is why we're getting these tech-blaming narratives from people like Kardaras who have money and own businesses and still don't understand why they feel so lost and empty. As Alexander writes, people need to belong within their society, not just trade in its markets.
And I just want to clarify here that this is not a simple, it's just the capitalism argument. Addiction has many causes and would still exist under luxury, automated, gay-space communism or whatever. It's one of the prices we pay for consciousness. Alexander is just saying that free markets make addiction much more widespread. It's in the water, and you can't fix the water by focusing on the behavior of the fish.
Alexander himself said that he doesn't think an individual spiritual approach to treating addiction is the ultimate answer. He wrote, "Sometimes this kind of intervention is put in a language reminiscent of Rat Park, and we say that addicted people have built their own cages in their minds, and they can escape their cages by clearing their minds." According to this view, the pain and fear arising from the dislocation that comes from living in a fragmented society can be peripheralized by concentrating attention on the present moment, allowing people to function as if they were less dislocated than they are. You can read all the Plato you want, you can meditate every day, but a capitalist society will still be fragmented. Dislocation is not just a psychological sense of being caged. It's not just a feeling. It's also a material condition. Marx wrote about this too, by the way, but he called it alienation. And none of this means that I think philosophy and spirituality or even self-help are useless. These things are very important in a personal sense. But Kardaras claims to be making a societal argument about the cause and the cure for addiction. And in that sense, I think his analysis falls short. As Alexander says, nothing less than a revolutionary project carried out on a global scale will save the world for our descendants. Anyway, time to go do some kratom.